And it's PLB with MLB News, back with another video. Today's video is going to be the most underrated player from every MLB team. One from each MLB team, the most underrated player in my opinion. Yesterday's video was the most overrated. If you haven't watched that one yet, a link to that video will be in the description below. And the videos previous before that were my favorite prospect from every MLB team and my favorite player from every MLB team. Tomorrow's video could be my favorite pitcher from every one from each MLB team, because there was only one pitcher on the list from my favorite player from every MLB team. So now let's go ahead and get into this video. We're going to start off with the American League. We haven't started off with the American League yet in this series. We'll start off with the AL East. And for the Yankees, I have Aaron Judge. I felt like this was the obvious choice, even though he was not underrated in 2017. I think he was underrated he's been underrated in the last years. Now we go to the next team, the Tampa Bay Rays, which I have Austin Meadows and Tyler Glasnow, who were both in the Chris Archer trade. I think they're still a little underrated, even though that was a really bad trade for the Pirates. I think that it's still a little bit underrated for Austin Meadows and Tyler Glasnow. I think Blake Snell is a little bit underrated too. I think he will have a bounce-back 2020 season. I think Austin Meadows and Tyler Glasnow will also have a really good 2020 season, if there is one. For the Red Sox, I have another player that came over in a trade, which is Alex Verdugo. I think he's going to have a really good 2020 season. He came over from the Dodgers in that Mookie Betts trade. I think he is going to be a big piece in that trade for the Red Sox, and Jeter Downs I think is going to be very good whenever he comes up, which could be the 2020 or 2021 season. I see him coming up towards the end of the 2020 season, but he could come up earlier. For the Blue Jays, this one is Bo Bichette or Kevin Biggio for me. I think they're both a little underrated, but if I had to pick one, I think I would give it to Kevin Biggio. For the Orioles, I've got Trey Mancini. He's underrated because he is on a terrible team in the Baltimore Orioles. I think they'll be the second worst team in the MLB. I've got the Tigers being the worst, the Orioles being the second worst, and the Mariners being the third worst. Let's go ahead and move on to the AL Central. Starting off with the Tigers, I think this is Matthew Boyd or Nico Goodrum. I think either way, this is a pretty obvious choice. I think those are the two most underrated players from that team. For the next one, the Royals, we have Whit Merrifield. You could also put Hunter Dozier on here too. I put Jorge Soler on my most overrated. Once again, if you have not watched that video, link in the description for this one. Alberto Mondesi's a little underrated too, so the Royals do have quite a few underrated players. For the Twins, I have Josh Donaldson. Even though he did get quite a big contract, I think he's still a little underrated just because of the two bad seasons he did have after that MVP year. Next for the White Sox, I think is Yoán Moncada. I think Yoán Moncada is a little underrated because I think Jose Abreu is the main player on that team, and he gets kind of underrated because Jose Abreu is on that team. Now for the Indians, this was kind of a tough one to choose. Not a lot of underrated players for me on that team. But if I had to pick one, I think I would go with Franmil Reyes. He came over in the Indians-Padres trade. I think that was the one that possibly sent Brad Hand over. No, it wasn't. That's false. But it was in the trade that sent Oh, that was the Trevor Bauer trade, the Indians, Reds, and Padres trade. Let's go ahead and move on to the AL West. With the Mariners, I put Marco Gonzalez in my underrated, but I do think he is a little underrated too, like underrated and overrated. But if I had to go with one for the Mariners, I think this one is Daniel Vogelbach. I don't necessarily think that he's really underrated. It's just I don't have a lot of other players that are underrated. For the Rangers, I think this one's pretty obvious. Last year, I think it would have been Hunter Pence, but this year I'm going to go with Joey Gallo. I think Joey Gallo is still a little bit underrated, even though he was an All-Star in 2019. Next, for the Trash Can Bangers, the Houston Astros. This was a player that was not on their 2017 roster when they did bang on the trash cans and cheat and all that. That would be Michael Brantley. He was on the Indians roster then, and he's a little underrated in my opinion. For the Angels, this one is not too tough. I think it's Shohei Ohtani, to be honest. I think Shohei Ohtani still gets underrated because the players that are on that team being Anthony Rendon, Mike Trout, Joe Adele's coming up too. I think he gets underrated a lot on that team. And now for the A's, we have Matt Olson. I think he's a little underrated too. Let's go ahead and move on to the NL. We will start in the NL East with the Atlanta Braves. Got the Braves hat on, the 2019 Memorial Day hat right here. Pretty nice hat, I would have to say myself. For the Braves, I have Freddie Freeman. I think he's a little underrated. I definitely think Ozzie Albies is too, so those are the two underrated players on that team for me. Next, for the Nationals, I've got Trey Turner. I think Starlin Castro could be on this list as well, and Kurt Suzuki. All three of those could be on this list for the Nationals, but if I had to pick one out of those three, I think it would definitely be Trey Turner. For the Phillies, I've got JT Realmuto. He's the second best catcher in baseball, in my opinion. I think Yasmani Grandal is the best catcher in the majors. Next, we have the New York Mets, and this one is Jeff McNeil for me. I think it's Jeff McNeil and J.D. Davis and Michael Conforto are their three most underrated, but I will go with Jeff McNeil for this video. Next, for the Marlins, I think they have two solid players that are definitely underrated on that team. I have Brian Anderson and Jonathan Villar. I think both are underrated, but I'm going to go with Brian Anderson. It sucks for Brian Anderson and Jonathan Villar that they are on such a terrible team, but they both are quite underrated in my opinion. For the Reds, I think this one's pretty obvious in my opinion. Eugenio Suarez and Nicholas Castellanos, I think both are quite underrated. Next one, for the Cardinals, I have Paul DeYoung. I think Paul DeYoung's a little underrated. I was going to put Paul Goldschmidt on here, but instead I chose Paul DeYoung. Next, for the Cubs, I've got Chris Bryant. I think Chris Bryant's a little bit underrated. He did get a little underrated in 2019 because he was on a bad team in the Cubs, which were a third-place team. I think if I were to predict again, I think I would go with the Cubs in second and maybe Cardinals in third. Next, we have the Milwaukee Brewers. I think this one is Keston Hiura. He can hit, and I think he's definitely a bit underrated. And for the Pirates, I feel like this is a pretty obvious choice, being Josh Bell. Josh Bell's really good. I think he does get a little underrated because he is on a terrible team in the Pirates. Now let's move on to the NL West, where I start off with the Giants. Not a lot of underrated players on that team really that I really think of as underrated. but I'm going to go with Johnny Cueto. I don't really think he's underrated that much. Maybe he's underrated a little bit, but not underrated that much. Next for the Rockies, I think it's Trevor Story. I think he also gets underrated because he is on a bad team, being the Rockies. I don't see them being that much better in 2020. I think he gets super underrated because he is on that team. Next, for the Padres, we have Chris Paddock. This was kind of a hard one to find an underrated player. If we were back in 2015, I think this would definitely be Eric Hosmer. I put Manny Machado as their most overrated. This was the only choice that I could really think of. Next, for the Diamondbacks, I think this one is between Ketel Marte and Christian Walker. I'm going to give it to Christian Walker for this one. I do think Ketel Marte and Christian Walker will both have really good seasons in 2020, and I think the Diamondbacks could be one of those sneaky breakout teams, especially if you have not yet saw my realignment predictions. A link to that will be in the description below. But in that, they had a little bit of an easier division, and I have them winning that division, so you might want to watch that video. Next, for the Dodgers, this one, there's a lot of players to choose. I think it's between Corey Seager and Max Muncy. I'm going to give it to Max Muncy, though, because he did play the 2019 season, and who knows how Corey Seager will return off that injury in the 2020 season. That's the reason why I have Max Muncy on here. So that's going to be the end of the video. Today I did the most underrated player from each MLB team. If you like this kind of content on the channel, leave a like. Subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and I will be back with another video tomorrow. Thank you for watching. Oh, and by the way, I am thinking about doing a 10-team MLB divisions prediction video. So if you want to see that, leave a like on this video. And that's the end of the video. Thank you for watching, and I will be back with another video tomorrow.